They mocked her scars, laughed like her pain was a joke, called her monster, without ever asking who she used to be. But when one quiet customer stood up, then knelt before her in the middle of a packed diner, tears in his eyes, the whole room froze, because the man she once dragged out of a burning convoy in Iraq just recognized her, and everything they thought they knew about the burned waitress shattered. Monster. The word wasn't whispered. It was launched, like a rock through glass, loud enough for half the diner to hear. Look who's back from the underworld. Davidson snorted as Kesha set down their plates. Careful with the eggs, Freddie. Laughter erupted from the Tuesday table. Brett wheezed into his coffee. A couple of junior associates chuckled too loud, desperate for approval. Kesha said nothing. She never did. Her face, partially shielded by her dark curls, gave nothing away. Only the long raised scars curling from her knuckles up her wrist offered a hint of something more. She turned, took 3 steps, and kept walking like she hadn't just been compared to a horror film villain in the middle of her shift. At Ray's diner, Tuesday was executive day. 6 well-fed men in tailored suits took up the long corner booth like it was their private boardroom. They ordered the same greasy breakfast, told the same tired jokes, and made Kesha's life just a little harder every single week. "Hey monster," Brett called out. "Bring more coffee. But don't melt the cups this time, yeah?" More laughter. Even the dishwasher flinched in the back. But Kesha didn't flinch. She picked up the pot, walked back, poured with the same quiet control she always had. Because she had learned a long time ago, people like Davidson mistake silence for weakness. And scars, they see them as flaws. Something to fear, something to mock. They never stop to ask where those scars come from. They never stop to imagine the truth. Davidson leaned back in his seat, chewing loudly. "I bet she got too close to a meth pipe," he said to no one in particular. "Or a boyfriend lit her up after she forgot the ketchup." Even some of the other diners looked uncomfortable now, but no one said anything. It was easier that way. The cruelest part, they didn't even see her. Not really. Just the uniform, the skin, the steady hands, and the parts they couldn't explain. But Kesha saw everything. Their names, their routines, the way Davidson tapped his spoon 3 times before speaking, the accounts they bragged about closing, the clients they trashed behind their backs. Because Kesha Johnson wasn't just a waitress with burn scars, she was a former trauma specialist. 3 tours in Iraq, field commissioned, commended for valor under fire. And the hands they mocked. They'd once stopped bleeding on the battlefield, threaded IVs in smoke-thick chaos, cradled the dying. Now those hands carried coffee, but they could still carry something else. Patience, memory, a calm that unnerved men like Davidson. They had no idea who they were laughing at, but they would, very soon. The coffee pot never trembled in her grip. Not once. It was heavy, yes, old with a handle that burned your fingers if you held it wrong. But Kesha carried it like it weighed nothing, like it was a rifle, or a stretcher, or something she'd practiced with 1,000 times in the kind of silence most people couldn't survive. She moved from table to table with quiet precision, refilling mugs without a splash, smiling when she had to, disappearing when it was safer. But behind that practiced calm was a mind in motion, calculating, storing, tracking, not out of paranoia, out of instinct. Kesha had spent enough time in war zones to know that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about awareness, reading the room, predicting the next insult before it landed, picking up on power dynamics, alliances, tells everything that might someday matter. And here, at Ray's diner, the battlefield was different, but the rules were the same. Davidson always arrived at 9:03 a.m., tapping the face of his Rolex as if someone cared. He never made eye contact with the staff, always ordered a Western omelette, holed the onions, but left half untouched. His laugh was sharp, performative, a bark meant to draw attention, not express joy. Brett, his sidekick, wore the same navy jacket every week. He liked to talk about money loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Kesha knew his daughter had just gotten into college. He mentioned it 3 Tuesdays in a row, but still referred to the waitress as it behind her back. Kesha memorized it all, not because she wanted revenge, but because it's what soldiers do. They observe, they prepare. She had learned long ago how to stay small enough to be underestimated, but alert enough to strike if necessary. The corner booth might have looked like a place for breakfast meetings, but she saw it for what it was, a power posturing arena. A stage for men too weak to feel strong unless someone else felt small. And today, like every other Tuesday, she'd play her part. The coffee pot clicked softly as she refilled Brett's mug. He didn't say thank you. None of them ever did. But she noted the new wedding ring on the junior executive's hand, the half-finished contract spread across the table, the name Langston Incorporated, mumbled between bites. Another piece of the puzzle, another log in the file, because one day they'd ask how she knew so much, how she got the timing right, how she dismantled the entire system with nothing more than silence, memory, and the scars they laughed at. And she'd smile, because the truth was simple. While they were mocking her hands, she was already using them to build the plan. They came in like they owned the place. Not just the booth, but the air, the sound, the rules. Tuesday, 9:03 a.m. Like clockwork, Ray's Diner might as well have blocked off the back corner and etched a plaque reserved for wolves in suits. Davidson led the pack, of course. The kind of man who mistook confidence for cruelty. His voice hit the tile walls before the door even closed. Brett followed, grinning like a kid who never stopped needing approval. The others rotated, junior execs, assistants, clients dragged in like meat. But the ritual stayed the same. Loud greetings. Fake laughter. Orders barked like demands. Monster working today, Davidson called out, eyes scanning the room. Kesha was already at the coffee machine. Back turned, her expression unreadable. The insult didn't land. It was old news now. Expected. Like thunder before a storm. But something shifted behind the counter. Not in her face. In her stillness. The kind that only veterans understood. Still like a fuse is still before it meets the flame. Back there pretending to be human, Brett muttered, sliding into his usual seat. Another laugh. Another ripple of entitlement. To them she wasn't a person. Not really. Just background texture. Coffee, scars, silence. A fixture with no voice. No story. No consequence. And that's what made her dangerous. Because while they took up space, she gathered data. While they cracked jokes, she mapped their weaknesses. Like how Davidson always looked left before lying, or how Brett flinched when anyone mentioned compliance. The Wolves played dominance games. Kesha played memory. Tony, the manager, peeked from the kitchen and gave her a look. Just keep your head down. But Kesha didn't need reminders. She knew how to endure. She'd done it under airstrikes. What Davidson never noticed was how the diner changed when he walked in. How the hum of breakfast conversations dropped. How the servers moved faster, quieter. How even the jukebox in the corner seemed to play safer songs. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just adjusts. They took their usual table, spread out their laptops, made loud declarations about margins and market share. Davidson loved an audience. He wanted eyes on him, but never hers. And that was his mistake. Because what he failed to understand, what all men like him fail to understand, is that the most dangerous person in the room is never the one making the noise. It's the one you don't see coming. The one bringing your eggs without spilling. The one refilling your coffee, while cataloging every cruel word. The one whose silence isn't submission, it's strategy. And one day when the wolves looked up from their plates and tried to laugh at her again, they'd find the world had changed. And the waitress, she wasn't background anymore. Booth 9 sat in the far back corner, half shadowed by the flickering neon sign that buzzed against the window like a tired wasp. Most people overlooked it. It was too far from the action, too close to the exit. But James Wright chose it on purpose. He wasn't a regular, just passing through. A cross-country detour after visiting his sister in Corpus. But something about the place, the way it smelled like scorched bacon and fresh coffee, the creak of the vinyl booths, felt familiar. Like mess halls overseas. Like downtime between missions. He kept his ball cap low, sipped his black coffee, and watched. Not because he meant to, but because he recognized something. Not in the layout. Not in the food. In her. The woman moving from table to table with terrifying precision. The one the men in suits mocked without restraint. The one they called Monster, like it was just another refill request. James had heard a lot of names shouted in combat zones. Some cruel, some desperate, Some final. But this wasn't just name-calling. This was power in action, fear masquerading as humor. And Kesha, the woman behind the burned scars and white apron, absorbed it all like a sponge that never spilled. He watched the way she walked. Not rushed. Not rattled. Every step placed with thought. Like she was trained to minimize noise, maximize vision. How she turned her body slightly, so no one could get behind her. How her hands never shook, even when a glass shattered behind her. That kind of calm. You don't learn that in customer service. You learn that under fire. You earn that when people scream and blood slicks the floor and time splits in half. James didn't know her name yet, but something in his gut whispered, "You've seen her before." Not her face, her stance. She moved like a soldier. And when Davidson laughed loud enough to startle the table beside him, when he pointed at her like a sideshow and said, "Hey Freddie, we're still waiting on toast, unless you burned that too," James saw it. The flicker, just for a second, in her shoulders, in her eyes, a twitch she caught and buried before it showed. But he saw it. That barely contained control. The kind of composure that only exists in people who've already survived the worst. He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. That scar on her neck, just under the collarbone, wasn't from a stove. It was jagged, deep, fused by shrapnel, maybe, fire from something more violent than a kitchen mishap. James had been a Marine for 12 years. He knew the difference between pain that life throws at you, and pain you step into to save someone else. And the waitress in booth 9's line of sight. She wasn't broken. She was built from fire, and whoever she really was, she wasn't done yet. It happened in a blink. Kesha leaned across the counter to grab a tray of scrambled eggs and toast. Her sleeves slid up, just half an inch, maybe less, enough to show a thin line of dark ink, smudged by scar tissue, but unmistakable to the right eyes. James's breath caught mid-sip. It wasn't just any tattoo, it was the edge of a unit insignia, faded, distorted, half hidden by burns, but the bold red stroke of the number 1 still burned through. Big Red 1. The 1st Infantry Division. His division, his convoy. The dust in the air seemed to thicken, as James slowly set down his mug. His heart pounded, not with panic, but with recognition, the kind that bypasses memory and hits you in the gut. It couldn't be. Could it? He thought back to that night. The roar of the explosion, the smell of melted rubber and blood and sand, the screams, his own voice, guttural, panicked, fading, and then her, not by name. He never got that, but by hands, steady, blistered, relentless, by voice, low, calm, threaded with command, by presence, the kind that doesn't ask for space, it owns it when everything else is falling apart. He remembered the pressure of her grip, as she hauled him through broken glass, the hiss of morphine in his thigh, the way she said, "You're not dying today, Marine," like it was an order the universe wasn't allowed to ignore. He thought she didn't make it. That's what the medic told him after the chopper lifted off. The woman who pulled you out didn't make it past triage. But here she was, serving coffee in a Texas diner, while a pack of smug cowards mocked her, like she was less than human. James blinked hard. The air felt too tight around him. Kesha placed the tray down at table 4, adjusted her sleeve, and moved on, unaware that the man in booth 9 was staring at her, like he'd just seen a ghost wearing combat boots. Because to him she wasn't just a waitress, she was a phantom from a burning convoy. A guardian angel with soot on her skin and fire in her blood. A walking miracle the world never got to thank, until now. James leaned back, his fingers still clenched around the fork like it was a weapon. Davidson cracked another joke. Something about crispy hands and extra toast. The others laughed, but James wasn't laughing, because he had just realized that the woman they were humiliating was the reason he was still breathing. Kandahar Province, September 2010. The sky was black, no moon, just dust and engine noise. 5 Humvees rolled down a winding dirt road, headlights off, nerves sharp. James sat in the second vehicle, legs cramped, hands slick inside his gloves. They'd done this route a dozen times. It never felt safe. Then hell opened. An eruption of light, a noise so loud it cracked thought. The IED tore through the second Humvee's undercarriage like paper. Metal shrieked. Flames climbed fast. James felt himself lifted, slammed, buried in heat. Then pain. The windshield was gone. His right leg wasn't responding. Blood soaked his camo pants, warm and fast. Shouting, distant at first, grew clearer through the ringing in his ears. 3 down in Bravo 2. Get him out. Now. That's when she appeared. Through the smoke, helmet low, vest scorched, her face streaked with ash. She didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. While others dove for cover, she moved forward, like she was immune to fear. "Marine," she said, sliding next to him. "Stay with me." Her voice was even, steel wrapped in calm, one arm hooked under his back, the other securing his neck. James couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The fire was licking at the floorboard now. She grunted, pulled, every movement calculated, hands blistered from heat, trembling with effort, but never panic. "Don't close your eyes," she said. "I got you," and she did. He remembered the way the fire reflected off her name patch, half-burned, unreadable, the flash of a tattoo on her arm before soot covered it, how she muttered under her breath. "This isn't where you die, not tonight." Outside the wreckage, she dragged him behind a transport truck, applied a tourniquet with lightning speed, and injected something into his leg. Morphine. The pain dulled instantly. Then she was gone, back into the flames to find someone else. He didn't see her again. He asked about her later, in the field hospital, described the voice, the grip, the tattoo. The medic shook his head. "One of the trauma specialists didn't make it past triage. Pulled 3 of you out. Took too much smoke." James had nodded slowly, grieved a stranger he never knew. Until today, until the diner, until the flash of ink, until the way her hands moved, exactly the same. Now, as the smell of bacon replaced the smell of burning rubber, and the laughter of entitled men echoed across booths, James sat frozen in booth 9, heart thundering. The waitress with the scars. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a memory. She was here, alive, and she was the reason he was too. The fork clattered. That was the first sound. James didn't realize he'd dropped it. His hand was trembling. The buzz of the diner faded. Laughter, silverware, the soft hiss of the griddle in back. It all fell away, like someone had hit mute on the world. Kesha moved past his booth again, balancing 2 plates, focused, graceful, a burn mark snaked just beyond her cuff. The same one from that night. James stood, his chair scraped back sharply, jolting a few heads around him, but he didn't care. His legs moved on instinct now, memory, muscle and honor, and something deeper. She turned, mid-step, catching the movement, their eyes locked, and then in front of everyone, in front of Davidson and his barking laughter, in front of Tony behind the counter, in front of every phone, half raised, and every mouth half full, James Wright knelt, not out of show, out of truth. His knee hit the tile with a soft thud. The diner froze. Kesha blinked, unsure whether to speak or run. She looked down at the man kneeling before her, confusion flickering behind her calm. Then he spoke. "You saved my life." Just that. 5 words. But they shattered the room. The laughter stopped. Coffee mugs hovered mid-air. Brett's mouth hung open. Kesha stood still as stone. Her hand clutched a tray she suddenly forgot how to hold. "I don't expect you to remember," James said, his voice cracking like it hadn't in years. "Kandahar, 2010. Night convoy. IED hit Bravo 2. I was pinned. You pulled me out." A pause. A breath. "I thought you were a ghost." Her lips parted, not in a smile. Not yet, just enough to let the silence settle around the truth. James kept going, barely above a whisper. "Your hands were burned. You were coughing so hard, I thought you'd collapse. But you never stopped. You dragged me behind a truck, tied a tourniquet, told me I wasn't allowed to die." A single tear welled in his eye, and fell. He didn't wipe it. Kesha's eyes shimmered, but her body didn't move. Her face was unreadable, but behind it something deep and old and fragile was being seen for the first time in years. Davidson laughed nervously. "What kind of stunt?" "Quiet," James said without looking at him. And somehow, the command worked, because it didn't come from a man trying to impress. It came from a Marine, recognizing a soldier. James looked up again. "I didn't know your name," he whispered. "Kesha," she finally said. He smiled through the tears.
"Thank you, Kesha.
"For my life, for every breath I've taken since that night. I owe you everything." The tray slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor in a soft clatter. Eggs and toast scattered across the tile. But no one moved, because in that moment, the woman they called Monster had just become something else entirely. A hero. No one touched their food. Plates sat cooling. Forks hovered, suspended in midair. Even the hiss of the kitchen went quiet, as if the grill itself was listening. Ray's diner, usually buzzing with the predictable rhythm of small-town noise, felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. Kesha stood frozen. James still knelt, head bowed, eyes wet, hands resting on one knee, not begging, not pleading, thanking. The word had a different weight now. Monster no longer fit. It sounded absurd, childish, like graffiti scrawled on a war memorial. And Davidson, for the first time, looked unsure. He blinked slowly, jaw half clenched, a bite of sausage, untouched on his fork. The smirk that lived on his face like a permanent accessory was gone. In its place, something else. Not guilt, not yet, but the first sting of doubt. "She's just a waitress," Brett whispered. James stood now. His voice was calm. "She's a soldier." Murmurs rippled through the diner like a current. Booths full of strangers now leaned closer, watching the woman they'd ignored for months with entirely new eyes. An elderly couple in the corner exchanged a look. A teenager slowly lowered his phone. Even Tony behind the counter, who had watched her wipe tables through insults and slurs, had stopped pretending to refill the sugar canisters. Davidson cleared his throat. "Well," he tried, "we didn't know. I mean, if she's military, you didn't care," Kesha said quietly. That stopped him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence around her did all the lifting. James stepped to her side, not to speak for her, but to witness, to stand where he should have years ago. Davidson looked around, eyes scanning for allies. But the room wasn't laughing now. No one was. Not even Brett. The power he fed on, the cheap kind that comes from humiliation, was gone, sucked out of the room like smoke through a vent. And in its place stood something heavier, older, built from sacrifice and scars, and silence. Respect, earned, not claimed. Kesha finally moved, bent down, picked up the tray she'd dropped. No rush, no shame. Her scars caught the light, only now they didn't look like damage. They looked like evidence. Davidson shifted in his seat. "Look, we didn't mean." "Stop," Kesha said gently. "You did." She didn't yell. She just stared at him, with the eyes of someone who'd dragged bodies from burning vehicles and buried friends whose names never made the papers. "You just didn't think it mattered." The room stayed silent, because for the first time, it wasn't just about toast and tips. It wasn't even about war. It was about truth. And the truth was standing right in front of them, apron tied tight, scars exposed, unflinching. The so-called monster was the only real hero in the room. Kesha didn't like attention. Never had. Not when the medal was pinned. Not when the flag was folded. And certainly not now, with half a diner staring at her like they'd just seen the ghost of everything they'd misunderstood. She stood by the coffee machine, wiping her hands on a towel that had seen better days. The tray was gone. So was the mask. James stood a few steps behind her, silent, steady, a witness more than a speaker. Davidson cleared his throat again. It sounded weak this time. "So, you were actually in the military?" Kesha turned, slowly, not to make a scene, just to be clear. "Yes," she said. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like it had weight. "Name?" someone asked. Soft, unsure. She gave a small nod. "Kesha Lynn Johnson." Another pause. "Rank?" "Staff Sergeant," she said. "U.S. Army." Her voice never changed. It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was just the truth. Solid, unpolished, undeniable. Role, Combat Trauma Specialist. 1st Infantry Division. 3 tours. And that was it. She said it like she was confirming a breakfast order. Like it was no big deal. But it was. Because every word she spoke unraveled the entire illusion Davidson and his crew had built around her. Every cruel nickname, every lazy assumption, every joke that landed like ash in her lap. Gone, disarmed by truth. "You got those scars in the field?" Brett asked. Quieter now. Less sneer, more stammer. She looked down at her hands, turned them slightly, let the light catch them, like history being read aloud. Yes, she didn't explain. She didn't owe them that. Davidson's lips moved, but no words came. He blinked, as if hoping to rewind the last 10 minutes, to go back to the comfortable world where the burned waitress was just background static, not someone who outranked his courage by a mile. "You could have said something," he muttered. "You didn't tell us." Kesha raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask." That was the moment everything shifted for good, because the room realized something Davidson hadn't. She never hid who she was. They just never looked. The patchy sleeves, the scars, the posture, none of it screamed for validation. It simply was, like the name on a dog tag, like the silent discipline of someone who knew what life cost and still chose to carry it forward. The silence settled again, but now it was different. Not shocked, reverent. Kesha turned back to the coffee machine. The moment was over. She'd said what needed saying, and now, she went back to work, because that's what soldiers do. Davidson shifted in his seat like the vinyl had turned to fire. He looked around at the eyes watching him, at the phones lowered to laps, at the silence pressing in like heat. The swagger that usually puffed his chest had collapsed into something brittle. He cleared his throat again, that nervous, stalling sound. "Look," he started, chuckling the way people do when they're drowning, and still trying to smile. "This is all just, we didn't know. Okay? If we'd known you were military, we wouldn't have said those things." Kesha didn't look up from the counter. She was pouring coffee into a fresh pot, moving with the same slow precision she'd used all morning. But now every motion seemed heavier, measured like a final cut. She set the pot down gently, turned. The room held its breath. "You didn't know," she repeated. Not a question, just air being shaped into a mirror. Davidson sat a little straighter, thinking maybe the worst was over. Maybe this was his window to smooth it over. Shift blame, backpedal into comfort. But Kesha stepped forward, and the words that followed left no room for comfort. "You didn't care." The air dropped 10 degrees. Davidson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not right away. Kesha didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth doesn't need volume when it lands with weight. "You looked at me," she said, "and decided what I was. You didn't ask. You didn't wonder. You just judged, mocked, laughed." Another pause. Eyes fixed. "And now that you've been exposed, now you want to act like respect was just hiding behind a uniform you didn't know I wore." Davidson tried to smile, but his face betrayed him. It twitched, embarrassed, cornered. The smile of a man who thought himself powerful, until someone finally handed him a mirror. "It was a joke," he muttered. "Just a bit of fun." Kesha stepped closer. "I carried men heavier than you out of burning wrecks," she said. "I've heard their bones snap under pressure. I've watched life drain from their eyes while I held their hand and told them it was okay to let go." Her voice stayed level. "You think I don't know what pain is? You think your little jokes can reach me?" She leaned in slightly, her words razor-sharp but quiet. "What hurts isn't what you said. It's what it revealed." Davidson blinked fast. "And what's that?" he asked, his voice smaller now. "That even now when you're caught, you still think the real offense was ignorance," she said. "But it wasn't. It was indifference." Her words echoed. "You didn't know," she repeated, stepping back. "You didn't care to." And there it was. No insult, no theatrics, just truth. And that was what finally silenced Davidson. Not shame, not guilt, but the quiet realization that he'd never even thought to see her. It started with a teenager at table 6. He had his phone out, quietly filming ever since James dropped to one knee. No one told him to stop, not even Tony, because something about the moment felt too big for rules. By the time Kesha returned to the back to refill napkins, the video had already hit a local Facebook group. 15 minutes later, it was on TikTok, then Reddit, then Twitter. The title kept changing. "Waitress turns out to be war hero. She saved his life, now he kneels for her." Decorated veteran mocked for scars. Then this happened. By the time the lunch rush hit, Ray's Diner had 4 news vans circling the parking lot like vultures. But they didn't come for scandal, they came for her. Tony stepped out of the kitchen, phone in hand, face pale. Kesha, I think you need to take this." She took the phone reluctantly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice, warm, calm, practiced. "This is Senator Langford's office. He'd like to speak with you personally, if you're available." Kesha blinked. Behind her the coffee machine beeped like it didn't know history was unfolding beside it. "Ma'am," the voice continued, "we saw the video. We'd like to honor your service at an upcoming veterans ceremony. And if you're open to it, the senator would like to hear your thoughts on improving support for transitioning soldiers."
Kesha didn't speak right away.
Her silence made the aide repeat himself, a little softer. "We see you," he said. She whispered something. "Thank you. Maybe." Then handed the phone back, eyes unreadable. 2 minutes later, Tony's landline rang. Ray's diner. A pause.
"Kesha's here."
"Yeah, who's this?" His brows rose. "CNN."
He mouthed to her.
"They want an interview." Another call. This time from the Texas Veterans Foundation. They'd seen the footage. They wanted to fly her to Austin. They wanted to recognize her publicly, honor her for the years she never talked about. James watched from booth 9, arms crossed, the hint of a proud smile, tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I told you," he said quietly, when she passed him again, dazed. "You weren't invisible, just unrecognized." Another call came in, this one from a New York-based non-profit that advocated for wounded warriors and burn survivors. They'd already started a campaign in her name.
Kesha stood behind the counter,
Listening, absorbing, stunned.
She hadn't asked for any of this.
She hadn't wanted attention, but for the first time since she stepped off the transport plane all those years ago, scarred, quiet and forgotten, people were seeing her, not as a victim, not as a waitress, as who she'd always been, and the whole world was finally ready to listen. The wall behind booth 9 changed first. Tony cleared it off the next morning, took down the faded Daily Specials chalkboard, the cracked Route 66 poster, even the dusty clock that hadn't told the right time in years. By Thursday, a new frame went up, centered, clean. Inside it, a photograph of Kesha in uniform, standing tall, her eyes focused on something far beyond the camera. The caption underneath read, "Staff Sergeant Kesha Lynn Johnson, Combat Trauma Specialist, U.S. Army 3 tours, countless lives saved." Next to it, Tony hung a small American flag, folded into a triangle and encased in glass. Below that, a plaque etched with quiet precision, "The Hero's Corner," for the ones who overlooked. Customers stopped in front of it, like it was a sacred site. Veterans began to arrive. At first, just 1 or 2 old-timers in baseball caps who stood silently at the wall, hands over hearts. Then came the younger ones. Marines, medics, Navy corpsmen. Some drove hours just to shake Kesha's hand, others just left notes on napkins. "Thank you for seeing us. You reminded me who I was. I didn't think anyone remembered people like us." Kesha stayed humble through it all. Still poured coffee, still cleaned tables. But the way people looked at her had changed, not with pity, with reverence. She didn't speak much about the viral video, not even when the mayor showed up to give her a key to the city, not when the town renamed the street out front Veterans Lane. But she did speak when it mattered, at schools, at non-profit events, at boardrooms where HR departments suddenly wanted to know how to prevent another Davidson moment. Kesha would stand in front of rows of executives in crisp suits, her scars uncovered, her voice steady. "You want to know how to treat people right?" She'd begin. "Start by assuming everyone has a story you don't know, and a strength you haven't seen yet." They always leaned in, because her presence disarmed them. She didn't preach. She proved, by existing, by standing in front of them as living evidence that strength doesn't always shout, and dignity doesn't always wear a name tag. Back at the diner, Tony expanded the Hero's Corner. Local vets started bringing their own photos, patches, medals. It grew into something organic, something sacred, a place where stories that had gone unheard finally had a home. And in the middle of it all, refilling mugs, smiling gently at the little boy who always asked about her superpowers, stood Kesha, once mocked, now honored, not because she demanded it, but because she lived it. And the world finally caught up. The ballroom was silent, hundreds of chairs filled with veterans, families, generals, reporters, and government officials, but not a sound, just the soft hum of the lights, and the distant click of a photographer, adjusting his lens. At the center of the stage, Kesha stood tall, no makeup to hide the burns, no long sleeves to smooth the truth, just her scars uncovered, uniform jacket fitted cleanly over a simple black blouse, and eyes that had seen too much to blink now. She held the mic like it was just another tool, like a scalpel in triage, or a field dressing in the dirt. For a moment she said nothing, and then quietly, "They used to call me Monster." A murmur swept the crowd. No disbelief, just ache. She let the silence settle again, before continuing. "They said I looked broken, but I must have done something to deserve this skin. One even joked that maybe I caught fire while cooking drugs in a bad part of town." She paused, not for drama, but for breath. "And for a long time I stayed silent. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. Because what was I supposed to say? That these scars came from crawling through fire to save someone else's son, that I burned so they didn't have to." Now the room leaned in. No one shifted. No one coughed. Kesha's eyes scanned the audience. Veterans who carried their own ghosts, their own scars invisible beneath suits and dresses and polished shoes. "They thought the scars made me weak." Her voice didn't rise, but they were the proof I survived. A few heads bowed. One woman near the front wiped her cheek. A Marine in the third row nodded slowly, hand clenched tight. "These marks," Kesha said, raising her forearm into the light, letting the room see the charred skin, the faded ink of her unit tattoo, "aren't shame. They're my record, my resume, my sacrifice, my story." She lowered her arm gently. "And I'm done hiding it." Applause didn't explode. It rose, like a wave climbing slow and sure, pulled by gravity and truth. People stood, not all at once, but like dominoes of respect falling into place. Senators, medics, teachers, survivors, strangers, all standing for the woman who had once been just a waitress in a diner, scrubbed from view, insulted on loop, passed over like she didn't matter. And now they couldn't look away. After the ceremony, when cameras flashed and speeches blurred, one young veteran approached her. He didn't speak right away, just reached out, fingers grazing the scar on her hand, like it was a medal. "I didn't know we could be proud of them," he whispered. Kesha looked him in the eye. "We always could," she said. "They just never told us." And with that she walked off stage, not as someone who had been redeemed, but as someone who had always been whole, just waiting for the world to see it. If this story moved you, if it made you rethink the quiet people you pass by each day, then share it. Tell someone. Thank a veteran. Speak up when it's easier to stay silent. And if you believe that scars can be symbols of strength, leave a comment, tap like, and help the world see the invisible heroes around us. Because respect shouldn't require a uniform. It should be automatic.